So I'm here to just look at possibilities for law reform, or what's been advocated. So I know some of you have been in some of these sessions earlier today, so some of this is going over old ground, but surrogacy is regulated in the UK. It's not true that it's not legal. It's not true that it's unregulated. It is regulated by the Surrogacy Arrangements Act, which makes criminal offences of the commerciality of it. So that's where agents and mediators and things cannot act for money. But as Steve said, a surrogate can be paid. No, what was that, Colin? It was Colin, wasn't it? Colin. And then there's later regulation introduced by the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act, which regulates all of fertility treatments in the UK. But for surrogacy's purposes, introduced the Parental Order and also the provision that no surrogacy agreement is enforceable in the UK. So you can't have a contract in the way that was being talked about in the American context earlier. There are agreements. Obviously, anyone can make an agreement. This just says that nothing can be enforced by or against either of the parties. And the 2008 Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act updated the Parental Order provisions, essentially just adding in civil partnerships and people in enduring family relationships, whatever that may be. So surrogacy in this country, as has been indicated in some of the previous talks, is allowed, but it's discouraged. The tone of the law, as set in the 1980s, when it came after a report commissioned by the government, came out very anti-surrogacy. It was a bit sort of frightened of surrogacy, I think. And so the law very much reflects that. The commercial elements are illegal. Payments are not. Agreements are unenforceable. You can't have agencies, and you're not allowed to advertise for or as a surrogate. And you can't broker arrangements for money. Probably the most significant part of the campaign for law reform is about legal parenthood and how that is acquired, and for some people it's important about when that is acquired. So at the moment, as has been said earlier, the surrogate is the legal mother, and her spouse or partner is the either the father or the second legal parent. And that applies wherever the arrangement was. So you can come home from America or Canada or other places with a birth certificate with both your names on, but you're not the legal parents according to the law here. There are some weird permutations where the surrogate is unmarried and the biological father can also be put on the birth certificate alongside the surrogate, but I think that just sort of overcomplicates things. You can apply for a parental order to transfer the parenthood. That's what Colin was talking about earlier. As he indicated, there's tight rules, and not everybody is eligible. And that does have a link to the payment thing, but it's not true that you can't pay, and it's not true that that will negate your application for a parental order, but it might mean you have a bit more explaining to do, I guess, is the only kind of thing. But it is a disincentive. It's put in there to to make people act in certain ways. Law has a very sort of an impact on the way people act, as well as what they don't do. So I don't need to run through this too much. This is what Colin said earlier. To be able to get your parental order, the criteria are that it must be two people, they must be married civil partners, enduring partners, blah, 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 between 6 weeks and 6 months. Yeah, get the slide. So this is it. This is all the stuff about domicile and consent and all that kind of thing. The important ones are probably the 6-month time limit, which this suggests, but I and others would argue that that has been largely eradicated. It's not unproblematic, because you're going to end up in a court hearing where you're having to apply out of time and that kind of thing, but there have been parental orders granted in respect of children. I think the oldest so far was 12 years old by the time the parents applied. And a lot of that has got to do with the fact that for a long time, many people might not have been aware that a parental order was needed, particularly if you walk out of California or wherever with your names on a birth certificate. You'd be very much forgiven by the time you've gone through all that and got home for thinking that you're the legal parents, but actually technically you are not. So most parental order applications are pretty much rubber stamped. There's no problem with them, but the problem comes when there has been payment that might be deemed to be above reasonable expenses. Then you're going to end up in a higher court hearing, or for overseas surrogacy tends to be put into the higher bracket, and the two often go hand in hand. So the first one on there about the two people, as you say, that might be changing. The remedial order is in the parliamentary process at the moment. It's been drafted. There's been a consultation on the draft proposals. That's gone back to the proposers, and it will happen. When it happens is a whole different issue. So this is the Surrogacy UK working group. So some of us here, Sarah and I, and another lawyer and some members of Surrogacy UK worked together over one summer. We produced this report about myth busting and reform. So we wanted to explain some of the myths that exist around surrogacy. There's a link on there. I can send the slides to anyone if you want it. If not, if you just Google it, you'll find it. So we did the work and we published the report in November 2015. So we considered data from the Parental Order Register, from CAFCAS, from the Passport Office, from the Ministry of Justice, some of which was obtained by Freedom of Information requests, among other sources. And kind of what we found was that the number of parental order applications was going up. Applications for parental orders was going up annually, and the proportion of those that related to overseas surrogacy was going up annually, but not that we were being swamped by parental order applications from people who had been overseas, which was kind of had been reported in the media for a little while. We also wanted to give a voice to those who had been involved in surrogacy, either as surrogates or as intended parents, and so we did a survey on that, and so we did the survey through proper sort of social science survey software, good alliteration, and I mean I kind of expected a handful, a couple of dozen responses, and within a few weeks we had 434, so it kept me busy for a summer. So of those we had responses from 111 surrogates, and having researched in this area for 20 odd years, I can tell you that's the largest sample of surrogate responses in any survey that I've ever seen. Even the Brazier report, which was 1998, they had 38 surrogates respond to that. So this was, quite, I was quite taken aback. We had 206 intended parents, of which 65 were gay males, and of which only 19 had gone overseas. There's various things that explain why we got so few. It's just sort of about 9% of our IPs had been overseas, and a lot of that's got to do with how the information was got around, and the time of year. It was August, loads of people were on holiday. And we had 112 others, and most of those others so we had clinicians, lawyers, social workers, and some other researchers, but the majority of the others were families of people who had fertility problems or who might be using surrogates. So we had quite a lot of mums of infertile women and sisters of infertile women, and people who were thinking maybe of being a surrogate and that kind of thing. So they hadn't actually fallen into any of the other brackets yet. So it's not, we can't claim for it to be wholly representative, but it is a number and it is some voices. So I just want to give you a sort of snapshot of some of the highlights, I guess. So what we did find that from responses on both sides, surrogates and parents maintain ongoing relationships. There's a high degree of openness about the process and to others and to the children, and telling children at a young age. Very few surrogates thought they should be the legal parent at birth. So that wouldn't be surprising if it was the intended parents. We would have expected that response, that the intended parents would have thought they should be the parents at birth, but it was surprising how many of the surrogates said, I don't think I should be the parent at birth. So it was, the vast majority. The average amount we found that we asked, they might not be telling us the truth, but the average amount a surrogate received in the UK was £10,000 to £15,000, and the breakdown of the costs is on there. So that's the expenses. They're somewhere in that bracket, and that figure is repeated time and time again. If you're looking at various other studies, it seems to come out between those two figures. The highest total cost was £60,000, and that's going to include everything like clinical costs and all that kind of thing. So you imagine you factor in more attempts at IVF, the whole thing gets more expensive. The sums paid to the surrogate range from £0, and some of those were sisters, sister to sister. There was a cousin surrogacy, and there was a mum. They got no money. But the highest we found was £25,000 to a surrogate, and that's a nice round sum. But the mean expenses was £10,589. For the overseas gang, it was a bit different. So these were some of these destinations are now closed to people seeking to use them. Mostly, as would be expected, most of them went to the USA. 3 India, now closed. 2 Thailand, now closed. 1 Nepal, now closed. You'll notice that doesn't add up. So that's 19 respondents and 20 arrangements. One respondent had done it twice. So 14 of the 19 were gay males. 1 was a single man, and 4 were in heterosexual couples. You can see the costs are much higher, as you might be expecting, especially when you're talking about the USA, when you're having to add in things like health insurance costs. We know that healthcare is not free in the US by any means. The sum paid to the surrogate, though, interestingly, ranged from £4,000 to £40,000. But in the mean, though, worked out at just over £17,000. So we asked also about reform, and that to us was pretty overwhelming. Saying should surrogacy law be reformed? Yes, was quite clearly the answer. With a few with possibly, and very few for no. The group with the highest proportion supporting reform was the IPs who'd been overseas. Not surprisingly, second highest proportion was IPs who had done surrogacy in the UK, followed by surrogates, followed by others. So that's quite interesting too. The key reasons they suggested for this was the law being out of date, the feeling that the law does not reflect the realities of what people have been through, and particularly in respect of legal parenthood. So that kind of was what we expected too. I won't talk about this, but the majority agreement, this is just what I've just said, about parenthood being assigned to the wrong groups. There was less support for the fact that surrogates should be able to be paid rather than just get expenses. That was much more mixed, no overwhelming sort of category. But people thought that, surprised me, that people thought surrogacy contracts should be enforceable, i.e. that the surrogate should be forced to hand over the child. Also high support rate for the fact that parental order, the whole process, could kick in before birth so that it took effect at birth. Other recommendations, we just found that our recommendations that came out of this, there was no question that reform is needed. It's just going to be a question of what that shape that reform takes. We think that the overriding presumptions that must feature the welfare of the child at its absolute heart. We would like to see better data collection. The stuff we got from the Ministry of Justice and CAFCAS and everywhere else didn't match up. It's not collected over the same time periods. The numbers aren't the same, and it's not necessarily complete in any way. So it would be nice to have some kind of centralised place where data about surrogacy is happening. And as Steve's indicating, now that there's governmental sort of weight behind surrogacy as a legitimate form of family creation, it might be that people are more open and there is more centralised sharing of information like that. You can see the other stuff on here. We also thought that single people and double donation, where both parts of the biological link are donated, should be able to become parents. single people, that looks like that is changing, but that's thankful to a court case. Our final recommendation was that state agents should produce better, clear and joined up guidance, and we thank Steve because that one has now been done, which is very nice to see. And as I said, that does kind of endorse surrogacy as a form of family formation, and in the eyes of the world too. So I on the back of that, I fail to see how legal reform isn't going to happen in one shape or another. So where we are now, that there is a project website about this ongoing campaign for surrogacy law reform. We are, as the working group, are currently still campaigning. We're still sort of lobbying MPs and that kind of thing. We have been doing some parliamentary work. We secured a debate in the House of Lords in December 2016, which if you want to get on the government's website or Parliament's website and have a look at that, you'll see lots of Lords, the peers speaking in the House of Lords quite overwhelmingly again in favour of surrogacy and in favour of law reform. There was also an all-party parliamentary group on surrogacy launched in December 2017. So that's cross-party MPs and peers support of moving forward with reform. So we're looking to see where that goes. The remedial order is happening. The first consultation period with the Joint Committee of Human Rights is just finished. It has been pointed out that there's a couple of issues with the way that the remedial order was drafted originally, but with any luck they'll be addressed and go on. And then we have the announcement that the Law Commission will take on surrogacy as a project for law reform. That's not a guarantee that the law will change, but that is a guarantee, very probably, that there will be recommendations made to government. So our report was 3 years ago now. We're looking to update it this autumn. So we've got a 3 years on kind of follow-up picture. So maybe next year I'll come and talk to you about what that looks like. And that's it. Thank you.